The first opening.
Second chances are not what break people. What breaks people is calling the same wound a new mistake each time it returns. You see the apology, the regret, the promise, and you want to believe something changed. But remorse is not change, and another chance is not unlimited access. At some point, kindness stops being grace and starts becoming a quiet betrayal of your own self-respect before you notice it. A lot of people think they stay too long because they are too kind, too forgiving, or too hopeful. But that is only the surface. Most of the time, they stay because they quietly change the meaning of what they are seeing. The repeated pattern gets renamed as a temporary mistake. The apology feels like proof. The regret looks deep enough to trust. And the reopened door starts to feel like compassion, even when trust has not been rebuilt at all. That is how people slowly lose clarity. Not because they cannot see the truth, but because they keep softening it until it becomes easier to live with.
When pain becomes a pattern.
People often think the hardest part is being hurt. But for kind people, the harder part is admitting that the hurt is no longer surprising. The first time something happens, it feels like pain. The second time, it starts to feel like confusion, because now you are not only dealing with what they did, you are dealing with what it means. And that is where many people begin to soften reality. They tell themselves it was just a bad moment, just stress, just fear, just a mistake that should not define the whole person. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes people really do fail once and learn from it. But the problem begins when the same wound keeps returning in different clothes. The words change, the excuses change, the timing changes, but the outcome stays familiar. You still feel dismissed. You still feel drained. You still feel like something important in you had to be ignored to keep the peace. That is the moment when pain becomes information. Not information about whether someone is evil, but information about what they are able, willing, or unwilling to change. And if you keep reading repeated behavior as a single mistake, you do not become more compassionate. You become less honest with yourself.
Remorse is not change.
One of the biggest reasons people stay is not because they believe the behavior was acceptable. It is because the apology feels emotionally convincing. The regret looks real. The voice shakes. The eyes drop. The promise sounds specific enough to hold on to, and for a kind person, that moment is dangerous. Because sincere emotion can feel a lot like evidence. But remorse and change are not the same event. Remorse is what someone feels after the damage is done. Change is what you can observe before the same damage happens again. That difference matters more than most people want to admit, because someone can truly hate what they did and still repeat it. Someone can cry, explain, regret, and still remain ruled by the same habits, same fears, same lack of discipline, same emotional immaturity. And if you keep trusting the intensity of the apology more than the consistency of the behavior, you will keep reopening the door too early. Not because you are foolish, but because intense feelings create the illusion of depth. They make the moment feel meaningful. They make you think something important has shifted. But real change is usually quieter than regret. It does not beg to be believed. It simply becomes harder and harder to mistake for the old pattern.
Access must be rebuilt.
Another chance is not the same as continued access. That is where many people lose themselves without realizing it. They think that if they forgive, they have to reopen everything. The same closeness, the same trust, the same emotional access, the same place in their inner life. But forgiveness and access are not the same decision. You can stop carrying bitterness without handing someone the same key back. You can wish them well without letting them stand in the most sensitive parts of your life again. You can believe they deserve room to grow and still decide that your boundaries will now be different. That is not punishment. That is memory with wisdom. Because access should be rebuilt through consistency, not restored through emotion. An apology may deserve to be heard. It does not automatically deserve the old level of trust. A promise may deserve patience. It does not automatically deserve full re-entry. And when kind people forget this, they do something dangerous. They confuse openness with obligation. They treat every second chance like a full return to the old relationship. And that is how the same wound finds the same door still unlocked. Not because healing failed, but because boundaries were reopened before trust was truly rebuilt.
When kindness starts lying.
This is why second chances are not the real problem. The real problem begins when kindness stops helping you see clearly and starts helping you avoid what is already clear. That is the shift most people miss. At first, compassion feels noble. It feels patient. It feels emotionally mature. But the moment compassion starts arguing against repeated evidence, it quietly stops being wisdom. It becomes a way of delaying grief, a way of postponing the truth, a way of keeping hope alive after trust has already started dying. And this is where self-respect is often lost. Not in one dramatic betrayal, but in many small moments of inner dishonesty. The moment you call a pattern a mistake. The moment you call remorse change, the moment you call reopened access love, grace, or understanding, that is how people slowly teach others that their boundaries are flexible, their memory is negotiable, and their pain can be reset with enough emotion. But real self-respect does not become colder. It becomes clearer. It learns to separate compassion from confusion. It learns to hear an apology without surrendering discernment. It learns to leave the door closed until behavior, not emotion, proves that something fundamental has actually changed. That is not cruelty. That is clarity finally refusing to abandon itself.
Test the change slowly.
Before you give someone access again, the question is not whether they feel bad. The question is whether something has become different enough to trust slowly, and that means looking for more than emotion. First, look for consistency. Not one good conversation, not one emotional apology, not 1 week of effort after a crisis. Consistency means the pattern starts changing even when the moment is no longer dramatic, even when there is no risk of losing you that day, even when no one is watching. Second, look for responsibility without self-protection. Can they talk about what they did without turning themselves into the victim? Can they name the damage clearly without hiding inside stress, fear, confusion, or a difficult past? Growth becomes more believable when excuses become smaller. Third, look at your own body, because sometimes your mind wants to forgive faster than your nervous system feels safe. If you still feel tense, guarded, and internally pulled back, that matters. Not as a permanent verdict, but as information. Your body often notices what your hope is trying to soften. And finally, ask the hardest question. If there were no apology, no tears, no emotional scene, would the behavior alone be enough to make you trust again? Because that is usually where the truth becomes clear. A second chance does not need to be rejected, but it should be paced by evidence. Slowly, carefully, with memory intact, because the goal is not to punish people for being imperfect. The goal is to stop handing your inner life back to someone who has only changed in words, but not yet in structure.
Clarity before another chance.
Imagine someone who has already disappointed you more than once. Each time, the ending looked almost the same. A hurtful moment, a sincere apology, a promise that this time would be different. And every time, your heart wanted to believe faster than your life had any reason to. But this time, something changes in you first. You do not ask whether they seem emotional. You do not ask whether the apology sounds deep. You ask what has actually changed when the moment is no longer intense. You watch what they do when there is no argument, no distance, no threat of losing you. You notice whether the respect becomes steady, whether the effort becomes quiet, whether the old pattern still looks for a way back in. And for the first time, you do not confuse warmth with proof. You do not confuse hope with safety. You let trust move slowly. Because sometimes the clearest form of kindness is not reopening the door quickly. It is waiting long enough to see who they become without the drama. Second chances were never the part that made people lose themselves. What makes people lose themselves is giving repeated access to repeated behavior, then calling that compassion. A mistake can deserve understanding. Remorse can deserve to be heard. A promise can deserve patience. But none of those things automatically deserve your old level of trust. That has to be rebuilt slowly, clearly, and through behavior that stays different when the moment is no longer emotional. So if this message meets you in a place where you have been softening the truth just to keep hope alive, let this be the moment you stop arguing against your own evidence. You do not have to become cold. You do not have to become cruel. You just have to become clear enough to protect what your kindness was never meant to abandon. If this spoke to you, leave a comment with one word, clarity, and subscribe for more quiet lessons on self-respect, boundaries, and inner change.